So this is going to be focused on VR, but there are a few things to bear in mind and to set up here first that are only currently available on desktop. So from the file menu up here, into preferences, you know, you can, depending on what you prefer, you can turn down the volume here and the sound effects. And de-emphasize scope layers, this is similar to ZBrush's dimming of subtools. So whichever subtool, or in this case layer, is selected or scoped into, that will be shaded as normal, and all the other ones outside of that will have a darker shader applied, so it'll make more sense when we get in there. The other one here is show scene floor, just to give you some sort of point of reference within the VR space. So you can see here, these dotted lines, it's just your XY axis, and I'll show you that as well obviously when you jump into VR. So the hand in this thing as well, you can see here I'm El Niño del Diablo, so I'm a child of the devil because I'm a lefty, and I have mine obviously set to left-handed. So I'm going to show the buttons when we get into VR as well, because I'll just explain, obviously your controllers, majority of people are going to be right-handed, so when I'm explaining this button, that button, I'll just explain it regards the fact that I'm a lefty. Tool tips, you know, if you want to leave them on the controller when you're starting off, and that's pretty much it. Like some of the stuff, you know, to do. So it's obviously still beta, so these things aren't done yet, but these other things will be available. I'm sure preferences that will be available in VR further down the road as development continues. And the other important thing that seems to confuse a lot of people, well, I was the same when I started off. I didn't quite cop this. So you want to get in and save. You want to save the scene first, and that's just the default folder structure that comes up where your projects, you can save them wherever you like, but I'll just leave them here. So we'll just say test. So once you save that, you'll see in VR the two buttons will become available, which aren't available until you first save in desktop. So make sure to do that, even if it's just, I always do this whenever I'm starting anything. I'll just save it as whatever it's going to be, jump into VR, and then I don't have to come back out of the headset and keep saving, because your buttons then will be available in VR, and you can just do quick saves from within the VR menu. And that's some of the sort of stuff, import mesh, you can import FBXs and I think USDs and that, and then just convert them into voxels and work on them as normal. I'm not going to go into any of this stuff. Export as well. I think that, yeah, the videos, the official videos of the Substance YouTube channel, I go into some of this stuff, but I'm basically just going to go over the tools to get going. So when I open back up again, then just make sure to save, and I'll show you the buttons when we get into VR. I'll be in VR when we come back. So here's how you'll manifest in VR in the default startup scene. And firstly, I'm just going to elaborate on the handedness of the controllers. As I mentioned, I'm left-handed, so to avoid any confusion, I'm just going to call my left hand, which is the tool hand, the primary, and then we'll call this the menu hand, the secondary hand on the right. So it's all going to be obviously reversed, and also because the buttons are going to be reversed, these buttons here, X, Y, and A, B, or whatever they're called, will be opposite on the controller. So I'm just going to call these primary controller, top and bottom button, secondary controller, top and bottom button. And then you have your two triggers, primary and secondary, and your side triggers, which are used for navigation. So if you hold the two side triggers down, held, and then you can grab your scene, and then you can zoom in or out by just spreading your arms and bringing them back in close again. And then you can grab one trigger, side trigger on either hand, and that's your orbiting. So I'm just going to put some clay there, and it's just, to me, navigation in VR is one of the best things about it. Working in a 3D environment, it's amazing. After 20 odd years, working with mouse and keyboard and Wacom, this is just this is what we've all been waiting for as 3D enthusiasts. So that's the navigation, simple, just your two triggers, side triggers. And as I laid down this clay, that was with the primary controller, or the tool hand we call it, and I'm just hitting the primary controller trigger, and that's just laying down clay and you can also hold it down and drag, and I'll show you the single setting in a few minutes. So onto the secondary controller here, I'm using the thumbstick here. I'm just undoing, going left with the thumbstick is undoing, right with the thumbstick is redoing. So back to the primary controller again. Your thumbstick over here is used to increase or decrease the size of the clay, and then left and right if you're using the warp tool, which I'll just switch to really quickly. And if I go left and right, you can see here it's going to change this hardness setting. So there's max hardness, and then go to the left, minimum hardness. So I'll stick with the clay tool for the moment. The bottom button here on the primary, that's to invert, like ZBrush, where you have your Z subtract. So you just hit that button to toggle between adding clay and removing clay. And it's also called the erase tool here. As you can see, it's automatically switched to the erase tool. And you might be wondering why there's an erase tool here. Well, if you're at scene scope, which will be probably discussed in another video, you can use the erase tool across your entire scene rather than just on an individual layer that you're scoped into. So I'll just undo that, invert that again. And then your top button here on the primary that's your dynamic resizer. And then if you hold the trigger on the secondary, that'll snap the dynamic resizer to 2-axis and then release it. And if you do use this and you want to go back to the default sphere, you can just go back here and just click into your menu and just click. So the menus, if you opened up your menu, this is what it's going to be like on default. So use the primary stick down to expand it, back up to contract it all the way in, and then you can also use left and right for different configurations. So I'll stick with this one for the moment, where it's fully expanded and we've access to all the actions as well. So I'm just going to undo that. So onto the tool here and the actual settings. You can see here these are the same. They're both spheres. One of them, it's swept. So if you start laying down clay, I'm holding down the trigger on the primary, and then I switch to the other sphere, and I'll try and go at the same speed. You can see there's a slight it's slightly smoother here. But in reality, if I wanted to sweep some smooth clay here, I'll use these smoothing settings here, functions, the lazy and the steady, which I'll get into in a while. So I'll just undo them again. And the top button again on the primary to go back into the resizer. I'm going to have to actually switch. I'm going to switch to a cube resizer. And remember, trigger on your secondary locks the axis, and then the thumbstick on your secondary will give you access to tapering. So this is obviously a dynamic resizer, and then if you taper, you can also reverse that. And this is just the same as the taper setting down here that I'll get into in a few minutes, and also the same again. Just to reset that, just click back on whichever one you're using, or once you switch off it even. So up and down, I think I mentioned that is to resize up and down. And some of these buttons are context sensitive, so it depends what you're doing. Different icons will appear here. I won't go into that in this video. This is mainly just about the clay tool. So open our menu here, hold down the bottom button on the secondary, and move down here. We have size, which I showed. You can go up and down, but if you have the menu open, it's also activating that. So, but it's just to know that it's the same thing here, size here and size here with the thumbstick. Pretty self-explanatory. Pressure, I'll switch to a sphere. Pressure is just using these triggers, have pressure sensitivity both here and also And when you want to place clay accurately, you can use this. I'll show that in a few minutes. So I'm going to just lightly press the trigger, and you can see it doesn't fully appear. We have that fall off, and then as I start to sweep a stroke and then increase the pressure, just like tablet pressure in ZBrush, but also obviously using the trigger pressure sensitivity built into the trigger. So we'll undo that, turn off pressure, turn on single, and now I'm going to add some clay with the trigger, hold it down, and you can see no matter what I do here, this rubber band is restricting the ability to continuously sweep or stroke, and it will just lay down a single piece of clay wherever you first hit the trigger. So that's single. Down to lazy. I'm just going to add some clay here. Turn on lazy. As you might have guessed, lazy is just like ZBrush's lazy mouse. So start dragging, we get a rubber band, and then when you hit the limit, it's going to give you a beautiful smooth strokes. And then we hit on steady. Steady gives you just really nice control fidelity, but it doesn't it lags slightly behind, but not as much. This is brilliant because if you're anything like me, you're going to have I have a very shaky hand. You can see it here. I'm going to hit, if I hit the secondary controller trigger while using the clay tool, it's going to switch over to smooth. And if I turn on the menu, you can see here, I'm holding down the right trigger and the bottom button on the secondary, and then it's switching over to the smooth tool automatically. The same way hitting this button inverts a quick access button, holding down the trigger while in your clay tool will give you your smooth, and then you can increase or decrease the size of the brush using the primary thumbstick, or else there's also a distance control on it. So the further away you are, it enlarges, and then it focuses in as you get closer. So that's a nice handy feature that I use all the time. And the point I was trying to make originally, was the shaky hands thing. So, especially with the raycast, the further you get out, tiny movements are sort of exponentially transferred. The further away you get, you have less control of the shakiness of your hand, whereas if it's in close to your body, you can kind of control it more. So that's why it is steady and lazy are so useful. You can just get lovely smooth strokes, and then obviously if you use it with this surface mode, which I'm going to show in a while, it's going to stick to the surface. So yeah, that brings me on then to the placement, the three main placement modes of the clay brush. What we've been looking at is free clay, free mode placement. In the middle is the Gizmo, which I'll go into last, and we've already looked at this one. So this is surface placement, so it's just projecting raycasting onto the surface. And then you can see now the difference with that. I have steady turned off. You can see what a difference it makes. So yeah, that's what placement is doing. It's basically, if we switch over to cube, it's basically embedding into the surface a predefined distance, and then sticking to the surface normal, as you can see there. So I'll just undo them. So that's surface. I'm going to move over to Gizmo. Gizmo is a fantastic tool, very versatile, and I'm going to firstly click the thumbstick on the primary, and that's going to reset your Gizmo. So I just want to get rid of that. Now, just people might be confused at first. If I move the Gizmo and then we'll say I switch to a different tool, it disappears, and you're wondering what's going on. It's because I'm going to hit the reset again, which is click the thumbstick on the primary. That'll reset the rotation, and then click it again, and that'll reset it back to 0, 0 across your axis. So as I said, the reason that's happening is because you need to hold the trigger down as you manipulate the gizmo. Hold the trigger down on the secondary, and then it's going to draw out. Lay down your clay, switch to another tool, it stays there. So that's the reason you'll be getting that. So again, reset. And for the gizmo itself, people used to 3D are going to be used to this kind of gizmo widgets. So we have our X, Y, and Z. Then we have our lock axis, whichever you're looking down. So that's going to be, excuse me, we're going to be locked here to Z and X, locked here to X and Y. So, it's a nice way to get it's going to be like a planar kind of constraint. So you always know that it's going to stay in that plane. Then we have our rotation. It's going to increase the size. And again, if you want to reset your rotation, just click that primary thumbstick. Also then, as you start to rotate on your secondary hand controller, the top button is going to give you access to angle snap, dynamic angle snap. And then same again, reset. And see the way it works. Even as I'm rotating, I'm holding down the secondary trigger here, and it's still laying down the clay. Reset again, click it again to reset to the world. And then you also have this interactive, like the dynamic resizer here, but built into the gizmo. You can stretch out here the shape, and then you can also adjust the size using this sphere here, or else you can still use the primary thumbstick up and down, or if you want, you can use the size setting in the menu. So 3 different ways then to adjust the size. So there's also a button here, the top button on the secondary, which is your quick access. I don't know why that's happening. Sorry, it switched over the surface because I had left surface active. So that caught me out just there. So switch back to placement. And I'm going to turn off steady. And now if I hit that button again, that's the top button on the secondary. That's your quick. You can kind of move quickly around there. Or else if you didn't want to, if you had your gizmo here, wherever you bring your hand, it's going to give you that gizmo. So it'll save you from, having to drag. Although I use these quite a lot, especially these where you're locked to the axis. Eventually, I think the devs are going to implement like a screen space move, so you could just grab and move it wherever you like. I'm going to reset that again. Undo them. Again, same. You can see even the icons here, the undo icons. So that's pretty much the gizmo in a nutshell. And I'm going to go over these next. The parameters. So as you saw, if I switch back again and use the dynamic box resizer, again, top button on the primary, and then use the thumbstick. That'll give you access to your taper, but you can also access it here. Rounds off the corners. Bevel gives you a rounded over bevel. Fill will hollow out your shape. And then also worth noting, if you bring round all the way, I'm going to switch back to box again and bring round up to 100. Going to give you a cylinder. Bring bevel up to 100. Going to give you a sphere. And then I like to use, because we have a primitive here, a capsule primitive, excuse me, which you can get by just bringing your bevel to 100 and then switching over to the Gizmo, and then you can just stretch it out. But we don't have another primitive that I use all the time in hard surface, and that is the extended cylinder. So same again, put round up to 100, and then that type of shape there. And then you could also give it a bit of bevel. This is one of my favorite shapes in hard surface. So again, hit the button or the icon here to reset, and then double tap on the primary thumbstick to reset the Gizmo to world and to your axis. So I'm just kind of, I know I'm going, it seems a bit long-winded, but just sort of want to enforce, I suppose, some of these ideas by just repeating them a few times. So they are our parameters, and that's pretty much it. As we switch through these, these are going to change slightly depending on what shape you're using. And I also think that eventually, so say for instance here with the donut or ring shape, same thing again, this bottom one I think will increase the circumference. So eventually I think the idea is that they're going to add more widgets onto the Gizmo that'll give us access then from the Gizmo to these parameters. So you just have more of these dots or whatever, and you could grab them and without having to go into the menu here and do it. So that's pretty much a clay tool. So the idea of this video is pretty much like just to show you the basics of the main tool, which is the clay tool, just to get you going so you can start creating straight away. So I'm going to just add in angle snaps here and symmetry, and then you can just you can place down your clay here so it's not as haphazard. And then you can also use the grid. So the grid is dynamic. You can see if I go in closer, the divisions get smaller. I have more accuracy with the grid. If I move out then farther apart. So you get used to that as you doing some hard surface stuff. And well, it was more important before Gizmo, but now that you have the Gizmo, you can do this stuff a lot more accurately. You don't really need the grid because we have that accuracy that you don't have before. I think before the Gizmo, I think trick people used to use was onto the warp tool, hardness set to 100 and a square. And we'll just switch out of that and put the grid on, angle snap on, and then you would just grab it there and then kind of move it along the grid just to keep it straight. So I just thought I'd add them in, and then obviously then I don't want to get too deep into it, but then you can just add a new layer and that's the dimming that I mentioned. But this is kind of getting into the whole scoping thing. So add a layer again, lay down some clay, and then scope out, and then we're at the scene level, and then you can scope in, and then here's our active layer, here's our dimmed out layer, inactive. Add another layer, add down some clay, scope out. We're at scene scope again. See here, you can select different layers, scope in. I'm scoping in here with the thumbstick pressed up or down, up the scope in on the secondary. So here's our active layer, and then you can scope between layers once you're in the layer. Scope to that layer. So that's pretty much the basics. I'm going to leave it at that because I didn't want to get into any of this other stuff. I just wanted to show the clay tool, which is kind of the bread and butter. So hopefully this has been somewhat useful for people just starting out. All right then, cheers, thanks, good luck.